Okay. You were saying that there were assets that they did not include in their statement of assets. Rondain said last night that some of those corporations they had divested themselves of. Did you find any proof that there was any divestment?
No certificates from the SEC. We precisely had certifications from the SEC that there were no divestment certificates. What's called technically in the SEC the deed of assignment, DOA.
Yeah.
In Arab's case, we got a DOA, but the DOA was filed erroneously because you're supposed to file within 30 days from your assumption into office. Mrs. Arroyo's case, 2001, February, when she first became president after the EDSA 2, and then again, well, June 30, or that means July 30, no divestment.
But did you find any current records on some of these companies like EVA, Realty, and LTA that indicate that they still hold some kind of beneficial interest in those companies?
I believe in a number of the companies, yes, because some of the companies actually, while not compliant with some reporting requirements like financial statements, EVA Development Corporation still is very current. And that's where the first gentleman, the president's brother, and their late parents were actually original incorporators.
And major shareholders.
And major shareholders. And still has retained earnings that's quite significant. But what we're saying is, in the case of these companies, they're not really hugely profitable. If you add all up, their income, they wouldn't still make up for the surge in stocks that, according to the Civil Service Commission, should be acquisition value, which means increase in volume, not price earnings or increase in value. Which
is, I think, the significant point, the significant unanswered point.
I think so.
That the PCIJ has made in this report. You can quibble about whether or not they still own this or that share.
That's right.
But you're saying that even if they still own shares in these companies, if you add up the earnings of these companies over the years, then you will find that it is not sufficient to explain the increase in the wealth over the last, over the term of the president.
Yes. The tax analysts and the fund managers who helped us analyze actually had questions about, well, we did a cash flow.
Yeah.
It should be in a household with much less money, simple in, out, money in, money out. And so where is it coming from? But I think the point of the SALN is it's so incomplete. It really begs the question of, where is all this amount coming from? Like horses suddenly missing. I wanted to look for the horses.
What horses?
Well, she had entries for horses about 600,000 pesos 1 year. And then they went missing. Yes, Mrs. Arroyo.
And there's no explanation of what happened to them?
Yeah, if she sold them to her sons, she should have paid capital gains tax. If she donated, she should have paid donors' taxes, etc.
What if they died?
Maybe they died, but I don't know. But I mean, I'm saying here that, she made it so difficult. I think the point maybe was she didn't take it so seriously. The SALN law.
And the question remains. There doesn't seem to be any explanation of how that wealth was accumulated.
That's
and
right.
You've gone over the financial records, and it's still not sufficient.
Yeah.
And again, you've not gone over this by yourselves. You've gone over this with tax lawyers.
With experts, with people who are not allied with the political opposition at all. They're professionals. Now, the other thing that's interesting would be the foundations. Attorney Rondain last night said that, well, the foundations are non-profit. I think in Arab's case, the Muslim Youth Foundation was precisely one of the cases that had been cited against him. He lodged amounts from campaign contributions in the Muslim Youth Foundation. First gentleman has 3 foundations. The other members of the family, foundations also.
They all have foundations.
According to Presidential Legal Counsel Raul Gonzalez, he doesn't really get it. Why do people in government have to have foundations? Because they actually could do public service, community service work through various sources already accessible to them, like PDAF or...
Well, the cynical explanation of that is that people in politics have foundations to launder money. But you're not saying that yet. I know. But we'll go into that a little bit in a little bit more detail when we return from our break and continue our discussion with the Executive Director of the PCIJ, Malou Mangahas. Stay tuned.
Ayos ba ang SSS ng negosyo mo?
Maliit lang tong restaurant ko. Di pa kayang mag-SSS.
Kaibigan, nabagsapat na sa hindi pakulog para sa kanila. Dapat may SSS ka at ang mga empleyado mo. Secured kayo, palatag ang loob. Mas may gana sa trabaho. Huwag sayangin ang benefits. Tungkulin ng employer ang SSS.
Oo nga. Bukas na bukas din, pupunta akong SSS.
Pag-ayos ang kontribusyon, secured ang benefits. Ang SSS, kabalikat natin.
House hunting? Seeking new investment opportunities?
Discover the stories and the people behind the best in Philippine real estate.
And get started on that dream home. Learn how an entire house materializes from the ground up and how to finish it off with flair.
A bigger, brighter real estate experience is coming your way.
Back to the big picture. I'm talking with Malou Mangahas of the PCIJ about that three-part report that we've all been hearing about this week. We were talking before the break about the foundations, that every member of the family seems to have a foundation.
Nearly everyone in the family.
Yeah, and I was asking Mr. Rondayan about that last night, and he said foundations are not for profit, and therefore they're not required to be detailed in the statement of assets and liabilities and net worth, because they're not assets per se. Because what do you say to that?
The Presidential Legal Counsel of Mrs. Arroyo was telling us that, you see, the problem here is when they start getting government money and when they start getting the status of a non-tax, non-stock, non-profit, and therefore you get tax breaks. So we know that politicians have every access to countrywide development fund, etc., for community service. And I think it stands to reason that the first gentleman, if he wants to do charity work, could always get some support from the President's Social Fund, etc. So, but why three foundations? And the latest was in 2002, the First Gentleman Foundation, which has retained earnings of 6 million pesos as of 2006, I believe.
Devil's advocate. Foundations are just the most convenient ways of spending public money, and if you have one, you're not necessarily stealing that money or laundering it, but actually using it. In other words, the same structure you would put to help people through a foundation is the same structure you would put in place to launder money.
Well, that is Ricky Caranda's story. But what I'm saying is, you see, many crimes have been committed in the name of the poor in this country. And I think the problem really is foundations actually are an indicator of the failure of government to deliver services, because if we're all right with the efficiency of our government agencies, we don't really need a lot of foundations, especially those owned or started or founded by politicians.
And I guess given your experience, then you do have some reason to be suspicious of politicians with foundations.
Well, actually, I don't really understand why they should compete with real non-profits. There's a lot of them, multilateral agencies that have been giving resources really to communities that are poor. And I think my concern really here is we don't really require any explanation from the first family at this time. Actually, we've tried that route. We sent out letters to all the president's deputies. We sent out letters to the Civil Service Commission and the Ombudsman, and they did not respond to our queries. We waited 14 days, which is reglementary in the law for you to wait if you have a request for info or interview. They don't want to talk to us. We even wrote Mr. Rondayan, and he responded only Wednesday night about the San Rafael property. And now he's saying that, look, well, investigate. If you want to investigate, we precisely sought them out. The problem really now is, I think the right persons to talk now should be the Ombudsman and the Civil Service Commission.
What would the Ombudsman say? Well, these documents have been with the Ombudsman since before, right?
That's right.
And they haven't seen fit to investigate anything.
The Ombudsman has broad powers, actually. It has its own law, actually, and it's constitutionally mandated to be the guardian of integrity in government service. The Ombudsman can act on its own, motu proprio, on cases, even if the complaint is just a phone call or a text message or an email. But I really worry that I don't know if there's that energy right now in the Ombudsman. On record, and it's not been denied, the President's husband is law school classmate of Mercy Gutierrez. Maybe circumstantial, but maybe this is her moment. In the same way that Civil Service Commission Chair had served as Deputy Spokesperson, Cabinet Secretary, Rick Saludo. And this is their moment, really, to show their independence because they're constitutional officers. Well, I think this is everyone's moment.
Well, she's